Perfect. Welcome, YouTube family. Let's take another deep breath in this transition into this week's sermon. Here we are. A new spot again. So today's topic I actually spent quite a bit of time with, and so we'll see how it manifests. Like, again, I am trying to keep these sermons a bit shorter to 20 minutes. We'll see what happens. And the title is going to be Why I Don't Teach God. Why I Don't Teach God. Because it's almost been 10 years since I've been a pastor, and I've given hundreds of sermons now and taught over 1,000 classes. And what's interesting is God is not really a word you hear me say or bring up that often. And every now and then I get questions as to why. And so I just thought it'd be a fun conversation to share on the reasoning behind that, and kind of what is the Dunisha approach to understanding God or relating to God. Insert gods, whatever. It doesn't matter what your belief systems are or lack thereof. I think this sermon will be quite delicious for you. So let's take that breath in. So some of you've heard me share this story before, and it's actually going to segue into a couple stories. And I think it might actually be in the New Living Peace book. But it's just the short story of how there was two individuals walking towards each other on a narrow path in the woods. One was very religious, the other one not religious at all. And they were both kind of the zealots. And so the one individual's very much over the top and always likes to share it. And then the other person is very against it and always trying to debate everyone in the non-existence of God. And so they're very polite. The one says, "Oh, here you go, please go before me." And they step out of the side and just very, very, very polite. And then the other one says, "Well, thank you so much. God bless you." Well, that triggers the other person who is a very strong atheist, and under their breath, they're like, "Well, there is no God." And then it wasn't so much under their breath because they wanted the other person to hear it. And it started a debate. And then it led kind of into an argument. And shortly thereafter, they ended up just parting ways and not feeling great about it. Not really feeling great about it because no minds were changed. And then as they continued walking for the rest of the hike or the path, whatever it was, what were they doing? They're probably rehashing what was going on, that whole conversation. And all the meanwhile, just down a little bit of the ways, was a third person that actually heard the conversation, but was not really thinking about it one way or another because they were in the present moment, enjoying the scenery, enjoying the surroundings. And then the story kind of ends there. And you're kind of just left with, what is the wisdom of that third individual that was hearing all of that, but was not really getting involved and not having an opinion one way or another. And in Dunisha, and what we teach is we're kind of that third person, where because you can endlessly question supernatural things, psychic phenomena, the existence of God, the non-existence of God, the existence of chi, life force, the force. It just continues to go on and on and on because there's no solid ground with it. And it's always going to be biased based off of personal experience. And so we like to take the approach where, because it can be argued endlessly, debated endlessly, it almost becomes a moot point. It cancels each other out. And how we approach belief, how we approach faith is that, does this belief or does this faith, does this me practicing this religion or not religion, doesn't matter what it is it benefiting my peace practice? Is it lending me deeper inner peace and mindfulness in my life? Is it allowing me to be more kind in my life, or is it having the opposite effect? If it's having the opposite effect, then we invite people to take a look at their belief systems, because if you're finding that you're getting really worked up all the time, or you're noticing that you're so sure and so certain about something that you're wanting to force that belief onto other people and it's leading into conflict, that's something to take a look at and take a step back. But if you notice that when you pray every single night to whatever you believe in, and it actually invites a peace, a presence, a feeling of oneness, fantastic. If you don't, and maybe you just go in nature and then you find that peace there, that's beautiful as well. Maybe you practice yoga, maybe you practice Tai Chi, maybe you don't do anything at all, but you find that you're just so kind to everyone who meets your way, who comes across your way, and you want to be very there with them. And it's not from some religion that's teaching you that. You just find that you love humanity. That's perfect as well. But once you start getting into who's right and who's wrong, and you get into that debate, you'll notice that you start to feel that tensing up. Who's ever done that with religion or politics before? And you feel that tensioning, that pressure. That's what we're looking to take a step back from. And there's a terminology, a mythology that's called turtles all the way down. And this kind of proves the point as well. So someone once asked, how does the world exist? And then the response was, well, the earth exists on the back of a giant tortoise. And it says, but what is that tortoise standing on? And then the person says, well, it's standing on a larger tortoise. And they says, well, what is that one standing on? Well, it's on a larger turtle. And so it's just, the universe is just built on the back of a giant turtle, and then that's built on the back of an even bigger turtle, and then finally they just say, it's turtles all the way down. And so what that means is that it's a moot point. It's just an endless thing, and you can't prove it one way or another. And so when we get caught up in that, that's where we can actually cause suffering for ourselves and others. And even Buddha taught, don't be so attached to belief systems, not even Buddhism, because when you cling too tightly to something, you're going to notice that it leads to not aligned practice, not aligned views. And I'm going to share a couple more things before I go into that specifically. So I was watching The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings again because I love it. And one of my favorite moments actually in The Hobbit is the very beginning. I love the Shire and all that jazz. It's so peaceful. But I love the moment where Bilbo meets Gandalf. And I'm going to just read the interaction real quick. And I'm actually going to take a little bit of creative liberty and talk more on what they did in the movie versus what they just said in the book. But here's in the nutshell. Good morning, said Bilbo. And so just imagine a gray wizard walking up to this hobbit, and then he just shouts, good morning on this beautiful day. And then Gandalf's reply is, what do you mean? Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good this morning, or that it is a morning to be good on? And then Bilbo's response is, all of them at once, I suppose, as he looked perplexed. And so I love that little story of just the very meaning of saying good morning to someone, and then Gandalf takes it in a million different directions. That's kind of the idea of God that we can relate to, where it's like we can go in this direction, we can go in that direction, we can go in this direction, and then in a year we'll have a different perception, and we can go in that direction, we can go in this direction, and then we go in that direction. And it almost is just too much. And then for us in Dunisha, we have to ask ourselves, am I coming back to this moment? Am I coming back to my peace? Am I embodying the kindness? That is what is most important. And for the person down below that's just kind of by the river listening to them, whether the existence of God or not, it really is not going to necessarily influence their peace practice because they're already embodying it. Does that make sense? They're already embodying the kindness. And that's what's most important. And I'm going to come back to that as well from the Zen perspective, which is really cool. So one more story, or two more stories I wanted to share real quick is Abraham Hicks, or Esther Hicks. She's someone that we enjoy the teachings of, and she often goes around countries, sometimes other countries as well, and then gives these big talks in front of groups. And so her consciousness steps out and another collective consciousness steps in and speaks through her. Quite unusual for a lot of people. And what's interesting is she shared a story one time, or Abraham, the consciousness, shared a story for her, where she was at the airport and she was waiting for her luggage to come through. And she noticed there's another man waiting at the same time for the luggage. They ended up having the exact same suitcase. And what's interesting is she's big onto the law of attraction. And she was just saying, okay, someone is going to help me pull this big ass thing off of the, whatever you call it, the conveyor belt. And, so I'm not going to have to because my husband's getting the car. And so sure enough, she manifests this wonderful man that is so polite, so kind, and helps her. He actually thought it was his suitcase, so he grabbed it. And then there it was. She's like, thank you so much. And then they had the interaction where he realized that wasn't his. Well, it was just a beautiful thing. They're just like, you have a beautiful day. No, you have a beautiful day. And then they walk away. And then Jerry, her husband, is looking. She's like, did you know who that man was? And she's like, no, who? She's like, he's that evangelical preacher on the TV that you're always bitching about. That you just can't stand. And he's like, if he knew who you were and what you did, oh my gosh, the ground would open up and swallow you. And so it's just so interesting that they both have a belief system that, had they known what their belief system was, that interaction would have probably been avoided like the plague. And what a great disservice that is. What a great disservice that is, that we cling so tightly to our belief systems and our judgments that it can actually close the door towards unconditional kindness and receptivity to other people. And so I just love that. I love that. And then another quick story I wanted to share, because again, in Dunisha, we really take this approach as, is this helping you benefit your life and benefiting the lives of other people? And a perfect example of this is, there was a Japanese gay man, who came to the United States, and he got really into makeup artistry. And then he went back to Japan, and he ended up wanting to become a Buddhist priest as well. But he was thinking, I'm this makeup artist, and then I want to be a Buddhist priest. How can these two things fit together? And his mentor said to him, if you want to be a Buddhist priest and still practice makeup artistry, that's okay, as long as it's actually helping you spread the message of kindness and peace, which he unified. And so I've never seen it in my life, but it was actually in the show I was watching. He gave a short little interview and helped someone. But here's this fool. He's a Buddhist priest, but in Japan, a lot of Buddhist priests actually shave their heads and wear all the robes. So here's this monk-looking individual that walks up and just perfect makeup as a man, and perfect nails, and is just so exquisite. Which again, in the traditional approach, you would never wear makeup. You would never worry about glamification, because that's the opposite of releasing self. But in that instance, his mentor said, if this is something that's important to you and you find that it helps spread your message, then do it. And so he found that unity between both those worlds, and he's become very well known, and he's helped inspire so many people in self-acceptance. And isn't that beautiful? And so that's a perfect example as to where we could become very rigid in a religion or belief system and say, absolutely not, you can't do that. Or we can say, is this still fitting with the overarching message of peace and kindness that we're looking to unify? And if so, then please go right ahead. That always gives me goosebumps. I just love that, because that really is the essence of it. But how often do we miss out on that because we become so rigid in a belief system? And even, it doesn't have to be faith or religion based. It can just be a belief system in your own very life, or your own friendships, or your own marriage, where you decide who someone is to you, and you don't ever give them room to evolve or change. Isn't that powerful? Let's breathe that in. So that actually segues perfectly into another Buddhist teaching, where it's a parable of, there's a person trying to get across the river. They make a raft, they get across the river, and then they leave the raft. They don't carry the raft with them into the forest, not to their next destination. What that means, and there's a lot of different meanings to this, but what that means is, when something's useful to you, use it, but then drop it, because there's no cookie cutter. A lot of times when we find that some practice or some activity really benefited our lives, we then project it onto everyone around us. And we think that just because it helped us, it's going to help everyone. Or maybe that we had some mystical experience, and now we believe that we know the truth, and now everyone needs to know the same thing. Or even when we use these teachings, there's going to be certain circumstances where they need to be adjusted. And sometimes people become so rigid onto a certain teaching, such as, you have certain religious texts, we'll use the Bible, for example, that was written so long ago. And or I'm not even going to put that judgment out there. I was going to say unfortunately, but I'm not even going to say unfortunately because that's a judgment. I'm just going to state it factually. There are people that still try to live that exact way from a couple thousand years ago. And we have to ask ourselves, are we allowing room for growth and evolution? And if it was absolutely true for that civilization, is it going to be perfectly fit like a well-worn glove for this civilization when we've had so many more openings of awakening and unlocking and awarenesses of how the world works? While before it was a very isolated world, and now we're so much more plugged in. And so it's not about devaluing faith, it's allowing faith to evolve. I'm going to say this, I don't know if it's 100% true, but I feel like it is. But I remember a long time ago, the Dalai Lama said something akin to, if reincarnation was proved absolutely with concrete evidence that it doesn't exist, then we stop believing in it. But it works for us and it benefits us, and so we're going to continue practicing that and believing in it. But you see how it doesn't put into crisis the religion, it just would evolve. Isn't that cool? And so in Dunisha, that is our approach. But again, in Dunisha, we don't make these hardcore claims of the supernatural, because again, it's turtles all the way down, people. Instead, we're just saying, is this practice going to benefit my peace? Or is it closing doors? So let's breathe that in. I totally am just like skipping all these fill in the blanks. We'll get there. Maybe after the... That's so funny. So, Zen masters, I want to share this real quick. Zen masters, not all, but many of them, take enlightenment very lightly. Not so much Buddhists in general, depending on the tradition, but Zen masters in particular take enlightenment quite lightly. And let's explore why that is. If you have that Kensho enlightening, awakening moment, and you get attached to it, what do you think happens? You're probably actually going to fall out of practice, because you're like, oh my gosh, I experienced this oneness. We are all one. I felt God. You might actually feel that, you may not even notice it, but your ego gets that inflated feeling. And then once you felt that, you're like, well, I don't need to practice as hard as I was, because previously maybe I was very consistent, but now that I've felt the oneness, I may not practice as much. So that's one hand of it. But also you might get a little bit arrogant, and then you might also start projecting that onto other people. And you might actually fall into judgment based off of knowing. You might become very rigid, thinking that, well, I did this to get to this. So therefore, this must work for everyone. Not realizing that in literally every religion and every belief system, and even people who don't practice religion at all, in every area there are people who actually reach that feeling of oneness and unconditional kindness and peace. It's not claimed by just one religion or one belief system. And you have experiences, you have written accounts from all these different paths. And even to this day, when you meet people who may not be religious in the slightest, and you're just like, oh my gosh, they are glowing with joy and gratitude. That's oneness. And so you see what happens is that Brad Warner is actually a modern Zen teacher I really enjoy, who's had a couple experiences, and he writes about them. And he says when he shared it with his teacher, it wasn't really treated as that big of a deal. It's just, well, that's a great moment of validation. And now you kind of, before you didn't know, but now you know that there's something beyond you that really connects all of us. How fantastic, how wonderful. But now go back to chopping wood and carrying water. And that's that old proverb where I say, before enlightenment, you chop wood, you carry water. After enlightenment, you chop wood and you carry water. And that's why I say before and after, it's almost, if we put it in more of a Judeo-Christian text, it's before you know God exists, you chop wood, you carry water. After you know God exists, you still have to chop wood and you carry water. You're still gonna shit. you're still gonna die. All that fun stuff is still there for you. So it's really not gonna change the, quote, ugliness or the decay or the impermanence and the uncomfortable parts of this life. And to counteract that polarity, we're still gonna embody peace. We're still going to embody kindness. We're still going to do our best to treat this world well. So whether or not we have that enlightenment, whether or not God exists or not, we are still going to move forward in our life in doing these teachings and these practices. Isn't that beautiful? I absolutely love that, because for that person sitting by the stream, it's like, well, if you prove to me that it exists, that's fine, but I still have my damn chores to do. And I'm still gonna do those chores with mindfulness. And I'm still gonna treat all people with respect. Isn't that wonderful? So that's the good news, people. Whatever happens, chores exist. Whatever happens, the impermanent nature of reality exists. And it is our opportunity to embrace it each and every day and be reminded of it. So whatever your belief system may be, use it as an anchor for mindfulness in your life, that we have this very rare and delicious experience in this physical body, and with these interactions that we're having every single day is a chance to feel that connection. And that's ultimately what we're teaching here. Isn't that beautiful? So let's breathe that in. So there's plenty more I can share, but I'm gonna just keep it short and end it there. Let's take one more breath. Breathing in peace, exhaling love. So I'll turn to our YouTubers real quick. Thank you all so much for joining in today. Hope you enjoyed this sermon. And as always, there are links down below. Soon we're gonna have a very exciting new website with more material to browse, but for now, there's still links below for anyone who enjoys our message and would like to support our community, these sermons, this lodge, this place, this sanctuary that we're building, with donations below. And we always appreciate that. And please don't forget to subscribe and to like, because that does help. So as always, thank you, thank you, thank you. See you next week.